Okay, welcome back. We're talking about like a timeshare or shared use of a hot site, warm site. A lease facility or something. And it could be that the disaster won't occur on, both sites simultaneously. Like, you're leasing from a partner and maybe they're having a disaster, but you're not, or vice versa. If they both have disasters at the same time, that could be some elbow bumping. There are companies out there, there are third-party companies that you can contract, a service bureau that can do some of this for you. You got mutual agreements about sharing the cost with another company. It's the same thing. It's no different than my house got wiped out by a tornado, but I move in with my parents while the house is being repaired. Right? It's the same concept. I may have to pay them rent or something. But again, have a sister company or some other organization or maybe a service bureau where I can just set up business temporarily. So we're talking about switchover time. I mentioned that for a hot site, switchover time could be minutes, warm site hours, and then cold site days, right? Mobile site. You could have basically a rolling server room, right? You could have a container on the back of a truck. It could be a warm or cold site, most likely probably not a hot site, but you could take it wherever you wanted, right? Park it over here, that kind of thing. I've seen that. Cloud-based provisioning, okay. I'm in trouble, I got a problem, so I spin up a server in the cloud to handle my need for the short term. It may cost me a bundle, but it'll work until I can get my system back up and running, and then I copy everything back down. And you probably don't want to do that if you're not using the server constantly. I mean, cloud services are kind of, the cost is based upon, the robustness of the machine, how many cores and how many processors and how much RAM and how much disk, and then the usage on top of that. So, since you're replacing a physical later, you could actually provision these things in advance if you don't mind spending money. You could just, copy like to a backup of your real system and do a restore onto the cloud version. Now, you don't actually run it, but it's ready. At any time, you could say, go. Okay, the timing and sequences of the plans. Let me get back to the right graphic here. Okay, so this is the goofy time. This is kind of a busy thing. So some sort of adverse event, and so I have incident has been detected, and then I have to react to it, which brings me down to the disaster recovery plan. And then I do something, and then maybe I'm going to have to go down to, the business continuity thing, because it's something is we're not going to be able to resolve this quickly, and we're not going to be able to do it at the current site. And then, crisis management is slightly different. Crisis management is really about loss of life. For example, if you had a fire or a tornado and people were killed, then in addition to setting all this stuff up, you're probably going to have somebody, a reporter with a camera is pointing at, who can say, we mourn the life of our, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So crisis management, page 217, is more about people than the infrastructure. Support personnel during a crisis, keeping the public informed, and then communicating with major, customers and suppliers to tell you that something's going on. Accounting for personnel, this could be difficult. How many people are in the building? And most people are going to say, I have no idea. I know how many people were supposed to be there, but maybe, Bob and Sally were out on sick leave. I don't have a head count. So when a disaster occurs, you're going to have to be calling around saying, did you got, a lot of detective work rather quickly to find out if there's somebody still in the rubble. So at 2 a.m., and is there somebody working at 2 a.m.? How the heck would you know? You know what I mean? You're going to have to ask around. What about the media? Do you contact them and say the roof collapsed? Or do you wait for them to contact you? It kind of sort of depends if you want to get ahead of the game or, be reactive. It's kind of it really just kind of depends. Keep it quiet kind of a thing. So testing a contingency plan. I mentioned, an untested plan is a useless plan. Or one of the phrases I always liked in the Army was the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. The more training you have, the better off it's going to be. So this is all about gap analysis. Testing will tell you that your instructions suck, okay? or the activation keys you need to restore the server are locked in some supervisor's office. And again, how much you want to make a bet that the phone numbers in the call-out roster are not 100% right? Yeah. A desk check. This is where you just sit down and go through it, make sure it makes sense. Maybe not the person who wrote it, because they're always going to think it makes sense. Give it to someone else and say, read this and see if it makes sense. A structured walkthrough where you say, okay, you put everybody in a conference in step 1, what is it you're supposed to do? In step 2, what are you supposed to do? And then a simulation. It could be a tabletop exercise. Let's assume that a tornado went through and here's what you had to do. Or you could trip with a fire alarm and see what happens. Do your people actually fall out of the building like they're supposed to? That kind of stuff. What's called full interruption testing. Ugh. All right, this is pretty doggone extreme. But go pull the plug on the server and watch what happens. Who got called and who showed up and how long did it take for them to show up? I mean, do you warn people in advance that you're going to do some destructive testing? Hey, man, that kind of makes me squirm. And then final thoughts on contingency planning. Think of this as continuous process improvement, where every time you do an exercise, you identify something that you missed, and then you go back and you fix it. That's kind of the most important part of these training and exercises. Now, what we would do is we would go grab the most junior person on the IT team. And let's say times are kind of lull right now. I'd say, okay, junior, go to the warehouse and pull out the old server and bring it back to the server room, plug it in, and do a restore of the tape. And then, here are the set of instructions, and then you watch, you don't interfere, and every question they ask, wait, where do I go to get this? You go, then you put that in the instruction. So give it to a junior person and have them do the thing. That's the only way to learn where the problems are. I'll give you a classic example, all right? We had a problem where we had a huge power outage, and lightning struck directly onto the building, and it blew a server to smithereens. And so I broke up the team. I said, you, go get the old server and bring it in here. You, go to the vault and go get the backup tapes, okay? So one team jumped in a truck, ran over to the warehouse and was, gathering the old server. The other team jumped in a truck, drove over to the vault, and he came back with a cardboard box full of tapes. I said, well, why did you do this? I don't need all the tapes. I just need the last backup tapes. And the guy says, the power was out. I couldn't read the labels on the tapes. And I went, oh. We kind of sort of need to fix that. That kind of thing. Okay, we've reached the end of this chapter. We're going to continue this a little bit slightly different in talking about backup strategies in a lot more detail in an upcoming video.